Introduction I've ever had. Thank you. And I really appreciate everybody being here, and my apologies for being late. I thought I'd start out maybe answering a question that might be on your minds. And it's, why should we elect a wealthy businessman on our side of the aisle when they've got one that screwed up the state that's on their side of the aisle? And furthermore, another one that's even more screwed up in Washington, D.C. It's because this election isn't about money, it's about values. It's about what you believe in and what you stand for. And I've spent my whole life fighting for progressive democratic values. I mean, standing up for candidates and for issues that really matter to Democrats and to people who care deeply about doing something right for the middle class and people who are striving to get to the middle class and people who fall into the safety net. There are 55,000 kids across the state of Illinois that get school breakfast because of a program that President Obama initiated from Washington, D.C., but I helped spread across the state of Illinois. Now 230,000 kids in low-income districts across this state get those school breakfasts. And there are thousands of kids here and actually right here, that get preschool and quality childcare, because for more than 20 years, I've been a national advocate on behalf of early childhood education. It matters a great deal to me that we help these kids. Remember, 25% of kids who show up at kindergarten aren't ready to learn. By a set standard, not ready to learn. And many of those kids never catch up. If we can get them ready, showing up at kindergarten ready to learn, it changes the whole game, not just for them, but frankly for everybody in this room, because it costs less, in fact, to get them through K-12, and they're more likely to graduate, and they're more likely to get a job, and a lot less likely to end up incarcerated. So there are more than 50,000 kids every single year that go to a museum that I help to build that teaches kids to fight bigotry and hatred and intolerance. And thousands of teachers in the state of Illinois that go and learn and then take those lessons back to their classrooms. I created a small business incubator that more than 7,000 jobs have been created at now. It's a nonprofit that I put together, and it helps people start businesses and get them going. Now, these are all things that I tell you they're in my background, and they're candidates that will stand up in front of you and tell you what they believe in, that they want to do in the future, and I'm going to do that. But I think it's important for you to consider, since there's so many people running for governor, what their background is, what they cared about, whether in fact they were standing up for the values that you think are important when nobody was looking, when they weren't running for office. Because I was doing those things for decades before I showed up and decided to run. I'll tell you, by the way, about how I ultimately decided to run, because I think it's important to point out. It has a lot to do with my wife. So I've been married for 24 years to an obviously incredibly tolerant woman. And we've got 2 kids, a 14-year-old daughter who's a cross-country runner, by the way, a state-ranked cross-country runner, and she obviously gets her athletic ability from me. And a 12-year-old son who's a football fanatic and a math whiz. But on the day after the last election, 2 days after, people had approached me before the November election and said, hey, would you consider running for governor because we got to replace Bruce Rauner. And I said, gosh, I'm going to fight hard to make sure Donald Trump doesn't become president. Well, I guess I failed at that. But I did fight hard. And after that election, my wife turned to me and said, maybe we should think about this, because we've really got to fight hard now. Now we really have to fight hard for the things that we believe in, because now at the federal level and the state level, we've got people working against. In fact, everything we care about is under siege. And so I thought about it, and it ended up showing up in the newspaper when they were talking about people who were thinking about running. And this was back in December, and I really wasn't really thinking hard about it. And 2 weeks later, Bruce Rauner started attacking me. I mean, I really wasn't even a candidate, and he started attacking me, I think because he doesn't want to run against me. And so I was concerned immediately that my wife would read this and that she would be concerned. So I sent it to her because I wanted her to see what this might be like if I decided to run. I texted her the article, and then she apparently looked at it, and she texted me back, and the first thing she said was, boy, he must be kind of afraid of you if he's attacking you already. And then she sent a second text right after that, and she said, we will crush him like the roach that he is. So you all may want my wife to be governor by then. So look, the things that I care most deeply about are the things that I've been doing in the past, but mostly they're indicative of something that my parents taught me, right? And that my faith teaches me, right? About standing up for people, about doing the right thing in the world, I created a business. My parents created a business. Maybe I'll tell you that quick story. My parents started a motel business. It was actually one motel. Originally, they were 26 years old, bought a motel, both of them. And they built that motel up, and it became successful. They bought another one, and they started creating this motel chain. It became a hotel chain and successful. And so I grew up in that environment. If any of you have a small business, your kids are, all in the business, I bet. And if you all grew up in a small business household, you're all in because you do the little jobs, whatever it is you're told to do, and you're talking about the business every day at home. And we were like that at our house. My first job, in fact, at age 14 was working at the motel. My first official job, because your parents put you to work pretty early when you're in a small business. So I worked at the motel my very first summer. And for any of you who, your first summer job, your first job you ever went to, I was pretty nervous. I didn't know whether I'd be, I knew I was going to work for somebody else. I didn't know what that was going to be like. It was a new environment and everything. So here I was heading off with my bus fare. My mother was sending me off to the motel 7 a.m. shift, 7 to 3. And my mother stopped me before I walked out the door, and she put her hands on my shoulders, and she looked me in the eye, and she said, now remember, you've got to work twice as hard as the guy next to you because you didn't earn this job. And he did. And it's something I think about every day. I know my mother told me that for one reason, but lots of people get told that for other reasons, that you've got to work twice as hard to get the job and keep the job. My mother told that to me because she wanted me to know how fortunate I was that I had good parents and that I had the opportunity to go to college and pay for it, and that I was going to be able to pursue things in my life I wanted to. So I know every day that I wake up that I've got to work hard to earn everything I've been given. But those values, I think, have led me to think about what it is that I can do in public service all the time. I think about that. Yeah, I created my own business, didn't follow my parents into their business. In fact, I started a business that makes, I'm looking around to see if anybody has one. We make coffee sleeves for your to-go coffee. And so next time you order to-go coffee, please ask for 2 of those coffee sleeves. And tell them you have extra sensitive fingers. And then we make the boxes that you buy your quarter pounder comes in, or the to-go sandwich box. Those kinds of things. These are recyclable, environmentally sustainable packaging for food. So those are some of the things that I do in business, and we've created, we've got 1,700 employees here in Illinois. Many of them are members of labor unions, I'm happy to say. They're our partners in the business, and we've got 10,000 employees all over the United States, and we've created 5,000 jobs among those 10,000. Unlike Bruce Rauner, who fired people to make a profit, we invest in our businesses and create jobs. And I'm very proud of that. And so, but the things, again, that my parents probably looked down from, they passed away a long time ago. My mother when I was 7, my father when I was 17. And I think they, hopefully look down on me and say that public service is probably the most important thing that I've done. So, I chaired the Illinois Human Rights Commission for the state, which is the state civil rights court. I worked in Washington, D.C. for Alan Dixon. And proud of that work, and in fact, to this day, my boss back then was a guy named Gene Callahan, and his daughter is a United States Congresswoman, Sherry Bustos, And I'm very proud of the work that she's done, and I was one of her very earliest supporters, so I still have that connection with Alan Dixon and the staff so many years ago. But I've done public service as a private citizen too, and I told you about some of those things. These are the things that I care about. And so, we've got massive problems in the state of Illinois, as some of you may know. And those challenges are not things that get solved because someone dictates an answer. If you look at all the things that I've done in my life, the things that have affected people's lives in a positive way, they've not been because I dictated an answer to the problem of how do we create jobs, or feed kids school breakfast, or teach kids to fight bigotry and hatred and intolerance. I got people together, the community leaders and nonprofit leaders and elected leaders and everyday Illinoisans who care deeply about these issues. You get people together, you provide leadership and vision, and then you all pull on the oar together when you've got the solution. And those are the ways in which I've been able to accomplish the things that I've done. And I think we need more of that in Springfield. I think we need to bring people together, and it isn't just Democrats bringing Democrats together. I think everybody needs to be in the room. I happen to think we need more Democrats in Springfield. But I also think that you don't solve problems just on one side of the aisle. I think you got to listen more. And of course, this governor, as all of us know, for 736 days, he was willing to hold the state hostage. And he was willing to hold them hostage, us hostage, to his right-wing agenda. You know where this came from, right? It was underneath the Carhartt jacket that he bought when he was running. And you didn't know it was there. It's his hidden agenda. It came from the Koch brothers. It's this right-wing agenda. The first and most important line in there is the top of it, which is he wants right-to-work legislation, which is about busting unions. And it's about lowering wages, because he thinks that you create jobs by lowering wages and lowering workplace safety. He thinks that you create jobs by having a very low taxes, very low wages, very low workplace safety, very low costs for businesses, and then magic, you're going to have jobs. Problem is, you're governor of a state, and it should be that your job is to make people's lives better. You're supposed to be working to create jobs and to raise wages and to make workplaces safer, and pay for the things that you care about, like education, which apparently he's willing now to threaten. I don't know if you're all reading in the newspaper what he's doing. He's now threatening that schools won't open in the fall. Schools won't open in the fall because he's got SB1, the evidence-based school funding formula bill, on his desk that's part of the budget, but he's got to sign it in order for schools to open. And he's now saying maybe he won't. This is the kind of guy he is. He's a guy who thinks that he can dictate everything. Now, we are fundamentally a democratic state. If you're a Republican who gets elected governor in a fundamentally democratic state, you better be willing to come together and compromise. And he's not been willing to do that at all. But thank goodness that there were some Republicans who finally, after 736 days, were willing to get together with their Democratic colleagues, 10 of them in the end, who are willing to get together and risk their careers in order, as legislators, to do what was right for the state of Illinois, to vote for that budget. Not a great budget, by the way. I mean, this is not a budget that anybody in this room, I bet, would write and say, we did a good job. What it was a bare bones budget that got us past the issue, we hope, of becoming a junk status credit state. And that's very important. The reason that's so important is if we continue to plunge in our credit rating, it costs all of us more money every single day, and it gets you absolutely nothing. You'd be paying just more money in interest, basically driving the state further and further and further into debt. And that's what this governor was willing to do to get his right-wing agenda passed. And it was right to work and some other things which we should maybe debate, right? Should we have term limits? We can all debate term limits. It has nothing to do with the budget, but let's have a debate about it. And he's got other items on there, workman's comp reform. We should have a debate about it. I think Republicans have one view about how you should reform workman's comp. Democrats have another view about how we should reform workman's comp. I think we should debate these things and figure it out and come together and compromise if we need to. But holding the state hostage meant, as many of you know, our universities suffered massively. I think all of you know that, aside from the MAP grants, scholarships that kids couldn't get or that they were threatened with having taken away, which, by the way, leads many students to say, I'm not going to go to school in Illinois. So our kids get up and leave the state to go to another school where they can get a better deal. And when they do that, about 80% of them don't come back. So we lose our best resources in the state, our best future, and our kids to other states. But that isn't all that happened. I mean, we lost faculty, programs at our universities, and we have some of the best universities in the country. We do. And yet, when you eat away at a university by, professors are leaving and our best students are leaving and the programs are shutting down one by one, our rankings, as our state universities have good rankings, they fall. And then when your rankings fall, you're less likely to get federal research dollars at your university. Kids are, again, less likely to go to those and choose those universities because they're ranked lower. As the programs diminish, we have great accounting at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, great accounting program and great engineering and so on in our schools everywhere, our community colleges too, some really great programs. When those get eaten away at, there's this thing that happens that you can't measure every day, but it's this loss of faith that occurs. And of course, 5 of our universities have gone to junk status themselves because of what the governor's done. So what he's done the 736 days wasn't reversed by having a budget. The damage that he caused, the damage is done. Now, what are we going to do about it? So when I become governor, the first thing we've got to do, in my opinion, is pass a progressive income tax. We've got to make sure, because honestly, we ought to raise my taxes and not yours. Because corporations should step up and pay in this state. If we need to pay for things, and we do, and we need to prioritize education, and it's been, harmed, certainly deteriorated by this governor, then if you've got to find revenue, then it ought to be paid for by people who can most pay for it, who have the greatest ability to pay for it. That's why we need a progressive income tax. There are 4 states in the United States that have a flat income tax like we do, 4. Every other state's moved away from a flat income tax because it's antiquated. But we're still stuck with it from 1970 when the Constitution of Illinois was established. Constitutional Convention. And we not only have to get a progressive income tax to solve the problem, but we also need, because we need to raise wages in this state, we need to raise the minimum wage. And by the way, this idea that, we talk about a living wage, and I don't know how many years that we've all said, we need a living wage. Well, in all those years, it's become not really a living wage anymore. But it's still $15, and we've got to be careful about how we implement it because we don't want to harm small businesses, so we got to do that in the right way. But folks, nobody wants to earn $15 even. I mean, $8.25 isn't right. But nobody, even at $15, it isn't enough. So what we need to do is make sure people are getting paid better than that. And the way you do that, of course, is create competition for labor, and the way you do that is create jobs. We've created no jobs in the state under Bruce Rauner. I mean, 0.5% job growth. Maybe that's some jobs. 0.5%, it's the bottom third of all states in the United States, 0.5% job growth. That's not right. We're the 5th largest economy in the United States. We can do a lot better than that. And it's something I know a lot about, and I think I'll be able to help. In fact, I think we ought to create more small businesses in the state, and we can do that because, by the way, 2/3 of all the jobs that get created in Illinois are created by small businesses. We all talk about let's go get the next Ford plant, and we should. And let's go get the next headquarters to move into Illinois, and we should. But let's recognize where a lot of the jobs come from. And that's from innovation. It's from people right in this room and our children who have really good ideas, but often can't access capital to go start those businesses. You've got a good idea and a good market that you want to go after and a good product and service that you want to go implement. that you think will be successful, and yet you can't walk into a bank and borrow money to get that done often. And small businesses that are already in existence that want to grow can hardly walk into a bank and borrow money in order to grow. And so we've got to create two funds at the state level. I want to make sure that we're the partner at the state level for small businesses. Two funds. One is a small business loan fund, and the other is a microloan fund. Now we can get federal help to do that. This isn't just like, hey, let's find money, in the ceiling somewhere. There is federal money to do this, and we can create these funds with partial state guarantees. But we've got to make that capital available. And then it's not just capital, we've got to provide technical assistance and mentorship. And these are the things, by the way, that I was doing when I created this small business incubator called 1871 that's created these thousands of jobs. It was putting all these pieces together and making sure that they're available in one place, bringing new, young, small businesses in, people with good ideas in to go create those businesses. Those are things that I know how to do, and I'll do, I think, well at the state level for all of us. Last thing I want to tell you is that if we want quality health care in this state, then we all ought to pick up the phone today and call up first Bruce Rauner and ask him, is he going to fight for us and against Trump Care? Because if Trump Care passes, it's not just the 650,000 or so people who will lose Medicaid, the extended Medicaid that people received as a result of the Affordable Care Act, but also Trump Care allows the governor of a state to tell insurance companies that they don't have to cover your pre-existing conditions. Now, every single person in this room is going to have a pre-existing condition if you don't already have one. So every person in this room, if Bruce Rauner chooses to do what his pal in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, did, which is he announced he's not going to have insurance companies cover pre-existing conditions. If Bruce Rauner does that same thing in Illinois, your premiums are going to go up. It's going to cost you more to get health care. So there will be people who are thrown off of health care, but everybody's insurance is going to go up. So we've got to fight that. That's the first thing we've got to do. That's not something that a governor can, that I can do in 2019 to fix. We're obviously going to have to fight it if it becomes law, God forbid. But right now we can do something. And that's why even in my campaign, I've organized phone banks to make sure that people are calling Governor Rauner, because he's got to express himself on this. I believe that the right thing to do for the governor is to stand against Trump Care. He's been silent. And he knows it would devastate our state's finances if Trump Care passes. $40 billion over the next 10 years, that's what it'll cost us if Trump Care passes. $40 billion. So I ask you to do that because I want you to pick up the phone and call Governor Rauner and just leave a message and say, I'm opposed to Trump Care, and I hope that Bruce Rauner will tell his Republican senator friends to vote against it. This is probably going to happen in the next week, so important for you to do that. But secondly, as governor, we shouldn't just be, barely making it on health care. We've got a problem that Affordable Care Act brings to the state, which is in 2020, there's going to be a step down in the amount of money that the federal government brings to the state of Illinois to pay for Medicaid. And that step down means we've got to step up. And what the original purpose of that step down in payment was, hey, states, if you're going to have larger pools of people covered, you ought to be able to figure out how to bring costs down. Well, we can. The best way to bring costs down is prevention. That's the best way to do it. People who fall into type 2 diabetes, for example, that's a very expensive condition for anybody that has it. It's an expensive condition to cover for Medicaid. We can prevent type 2 diabetes, but we got to start working on the prevention of it now. And I'm a big believer across the board in prevention. I think that'll do a lot for us to bring costs down. But we can't overlook this. It's a looming problem for the state, and yet Bruce Rauner said nothing and done nothing about it. There's a lot more that I could say. I'd rather have a dialogue with all of you. I'll say another thing, last thing, which is I think I'm the only candidate that isn't criticizing my Democratic opponents in this race, because I think every day we should be beating up on Bruce Rauner, who is a failed governor in this state. Yeah, and instead of beating up on each other. And if we all aim our firepower at Bruce Rauner every single day, I think we have a much better prospect of winning. If we don't, I think we're playing his game. He has no opponent in his primary. He wants to make us fight each other. And Democrats, a melee on our side is just going to weaken us in the general election. It's the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong thing to do. Let me open it up for questions for any of you. Yes, ma'am.
I have first a comment and then a question. I've never heard Dr. Diver say anything negative about another candidate. In fact, he has gone out of his way to say,
You're right.
We will not do that. One of us is going to win. We need to support each other.
You're right. I'm extra sensitive about the ones that have been critical, so you're right. You're right, and actually I like Bob Diver. I've gotten to know him along the trail, and he's one of the people I really have come to admire.
Okay. You mentioned microloans, and
yes.
I was wondering what range of funding are you talking about, and what model would you be basing this off of?
Mm-hmm. So there's a federal program that's actually the model for this, we're talking about loans that are anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000. You could even do smaller amounts too, because there are businesses, you think, well, gee, how could you start a business for that? But you can. There are service businesses, for example. People can, go into the lawn care business. Just as an example, if you can buy the equipment, it puts 2 or 3 people to work. It starts them going because you can buy the equipment that you need for lawn care. Window washing, you can almost make the list yourself. So lots of opportunities for that.
That's more significant than my understanding of microlending. So
right, and microlending historically, as you know, internationally, partly because of the costs in other countries,
and you could work very well, so.
You could do for $100 or something like that. But this is more like business. You have to start a business with a little more than that here. Yes, ma'am.
What is your position on universal health care at the state level until we can get it on a national level?
Well, again, I want to extend health care to everybody. So I'm in favor of universal health care. If you're talking about single payer, I think it's possible that a single payer system at the federal level is the right. I want to cover everybody because it's the right thing. We have to cover everybody. So the question is, and there are 3 or 4 ways I think that you could do that, and you've seen over the years candidates have sort of thrown out the ideas for doing that. Single payer at the federal level is much better than single payer at the state level, because the bigger the pool, the lower the cost. So that's the only challenge with trying to do it at a state level. In California, there's been a proposal. It's moved through the legislature, but some of the estimates of the cost of it are over $100 billion. So it's a challenge when you just have one state. Yes, sir.
I have 2 related questions. The progressive tax that you mentioned, that makes excellent sense to me. I imagine that is difficult to make happen. So I wonder what your sense is of the difficulties and what ideas you have about how to overcome those difficulties. And another sort of fiscal question, the state university retirement system, the pension system. Yeah. I'm expecting to retire next year after 31 years teaching at SIU Edwardsville, so I'm particularly interested in that question. It's a mess, as you know, billions of dollars underfunded and so on.
Yes.
So what do you do about that? And to what extent is the progressive tax a partial solution to that, or what else has to happen?
So you shouldn't be at all embarrassed about the fact that it's a question about your own self-interest, because I think that's something. When I was 7 years old, I remember that George McGovern was running for president, and he was for a 6-day school week. I didn't like George McGovern when I was 7 years old. It's a pocketbook issue for a 7-year-old, progressive income tax and pensions. The progressive income tax is very hard to get done. So let's talk about how we would get it done. The first thing is there aren't enough votes today in the legislature, in the House or the Senate, because unfortunately it's got to pass by a supermajority, not just a simple majority. And if you count votes today, there isn't a supermajority today. But that's why I'm running in a transparent way, advocating for progressive income tax and working with state legislators and state legislative candidates and state senators and state senate candidates to make sure that we are helping those candidates running. We want them to beat Republicans, and we want to make sure that we are changing the minds of Democrats that are in office today, that they should stand for a progressive income tax, because if we run on it and we win on it, it makes it a lot easier for everybody to vote for it. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing is we may not get it. Or it's going to, by the way, it'll take 2 years even if we have the right number of votes, because you've got to go through the process of getting it passed, signed, and then referendum has to be on the ballot for all of you to vote on because it's a constitutional amendment. So that's hard to do, and that's 2 years, whether we get it done or don't get it done. Don Harmon has a solution to this problem, which I think is very interesting. He's a state senator, and his proposal has been that you could increase the flat tax and then increase the exemptions to the flat tax so that people in the middle class and people who are striving to get to the middle class are exempted from the increase. And therefore you'd create a multi-tier tax system. You could even have possibly 3 tiers, although 2 is probably simpler and easier. I actually think you need a multi-tier system in the end, and that's why a constitutional amendment is better. I'm also not 100% sure whether the Supreme Court of Illinois would rule that that's a de facto, violation of the constitutional provision for a flat tax. Having said that, it's a really good idea as a substitute, and so those are a couple ways. Pensions, yeah, I mean, there's a long answer to and I won't try to give the long answer. The short answer is, this is a contract that got entered between the state or a university and the people who accepted jobs. When you go get a job as a teacher, professor, or a state worker, you're not getting overpaid. And so part of the deal is that you get a good pension. And then when the state decides, when you're just about to retire, and you've got a governor who says, oh, he's okay with cutting 40% of your pension, let's say, that's not fair. People haven't saved enough. They're not, they've got it. They're ready for retirement because they've made all the plans and saved, and it's time to retire, and now someone's going to take away 40% of the pension. So we've got to live up to that obligation. And by the way, the Supreme Court of Illinois says we have to live up to the obligation, so anybody that doesn't think we should, it's the law now. So can we is really the question, and Bruce Rauner wants to convince you that we can't, because he wants everybody to believe that the state is going to become insolvent. And which is not true, and that he wants you to believe that because he wants to remake the state and have basically all of us give in to his ideas. That's what that whole hostage taking was for 2 years. Was hoping that everybody would just give in. So the way you handle it, I've seen several plans that would work, because here's what happened. Just the amortization schedule is not one you would ever sign up for your own home. The payments were flat for a number of years at a low level, payments into the system, okay? And then they go flat, 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 and about 10 years in they go like this. And so as long as you're only in office for 10 years, these legislators are like, hey, this is great, and I'll be long gone from office by the time this all happens. And so here we are, we're paying for it at $7 billion now, starting at 2, I think, at the beginning, 7 now, and it goes to 16 and possibly more. And they skipped payments along the way. And so how would you solve this problem if it was your own home? The only way to solve it, without actually going insolvent, is to step up the payments now in order to level them out so they don't go to here. You can level them out, right, in the amortization schedule with higher payments now, but leveling it out makes budgeting much more logical. If we don't do that, how are we going to, you'd have to raise taxes every year essentially to deal with this. So we can do it. It is absolutely doable, and I've seen plans that will allow us to do it, but Bruce Rauner wants to convince us it can't be done so that we'll all give up on it. Yes, sir.
Simple question. Are you familiar with Senator Cullerton's proposal to deal with the pension?
Yeah, kind of a consideration model is what they call it.
If you were elected governor, would you sign that if it
So I don't think it works. I don't think it works. I mean, I respect Senator Cullerton, and he's an attorney, I'm an attorney too. I get what consideration is. The whole idea is essentially making a trade now, that's worth the same as the pension would be worth over time. And that's what it is, but it doesn't save you any money. It just means, essentially you're swapping, consideration is essentially got to be something fair. And you'd be swapping things that, you're swapping equal for equal. It doesn't solve the problem of paying for pensions. It doesn't lower your pension liability. It just is another way to pay for the pension liability. So I'm not a big fan of it. I also don't think the Supreme Court would rule that that's okay. It might, but I don't think it would.
I believe it would force teachers to choose between two plans that both would diminish your pension.
Well, I don't think the Supreme Court would fall for that. I mean, that I'm sure
Why
of.
is Cullerton advancing such a thing?
I don't know. And I have respect for President Cullerton, but I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about legalizing marijuana?
I'm in favor of legalizing marijuana for 3 reasons. And I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and I don't think they're smoking any pot now. I guess I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. And my wife and I don't smoke pot. But, and it shouldn't be about money as a first reason. Some people say, let's legalize this because there's a lot of money we should get in taxes. There is a lot of money to get in
I'm
taxes.
good for pain relief.
For pain relief, well, that for sure. I mean, you're not talking about for recreational use, you're talking about medical.
Anybody should have anything they want, but I personally
Yeah.
am just looking for. pain
Sure.
relief.
Well, I want to legalize it because there are 3 reasons that we ought to legalize it, and I think that it's the right thing to do. The first and most important reason is safety. Again, I've got kids, and anybody that is smoking pot, and it's pretty readily available, by the way, pretty readily available, I'm told, and even my 14-year-old daughter who's not smoking it. But she says there are kids that she knows at school. She's 14, kids she knows that can get it, and where are they getting it from, right? And who are they getting it from? What's in it? What are they smoking? Because a lot of the dealers are also trying to get you to move on to another drug, and so they can actually lace the drug because you don't know where it came from, with things that when you go back for another bag of pot, you're maybe going to buy something else. So I want to take it all out of the hands of these unsafe providers, and put it in safe providers. And even my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, pointed in our living room where we've got like a tray of alcohol when adults come over, and she said, "Dad, people die from alcohol poisoning, but nobody's ever died from an overdose of smoking pot," and that's true. So out of the mouth of a 14-year-old. So that's the first reason, safety. Second reason, I also think we'll be able to regulate it and keep it out of people's hands better than we can today. It's so readily available. So the second reason is criminal justice reform. We're paying for people to go to prison because they've got a bag of pot. That doesn't make sense to me. We got other bigger problems. And then the third reason is $350 to $650 million of tax revenue that we could have for the state, which we badly need. But again, I wouldn't make that the first reason. There are some people who do. I don't. I think
Get
that's.
rid of private prisons at the same time.
Well, we shouldn't have private prisons. I agree. Yeah. I just want to make sure I cover every other people that haven't asked questions, and then I'll come back to you. Is it a quick one? Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, so you're talking about the cultivation of it also?
Yes.
Right, okay.
That it would be that you.
Monetary income, yeah.
Yeah.
Tax revenue, income, business building.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Free jobs.
There's a lady back here, and then I'll come back to you. I promise. Yeah. I think you had your hand up. Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm a medical cannabis patient, so 2 years ago I wouldn't have walked in here, so.
We're glad you're here.
It's-
For a lot of reasons,
works.
we're glad you're here.
Also, the state of Illinois doesn't do anything for, renewable energy credits anymore. For example, we just installed last year $20,000 in solar panels. We don't have enough income to get the federal tax credits back to us, so they're splitting that up in a few years. And we didn't get anything back from the state. And I know just the company that installed my panels created 3 new businesses, cause their electricians own their own business now. So I really was wondering, cause I haven't heard environmental or, I think it's money in your pocket. So every month, my electric bill is now less than $70. It used to be around $300. So, I mean, I think it would be good for the state too. We wouldn't spend as much, so whether you're.
I do too. I think that renewables are hugely important. I want to make it clear to everybody though, because lots of candidates will just stand up and say, you know, yes, everything should go renewable. But it's not that easy because I'm in favor of it, but I just want to say we've got to work hard at it is really what I'm saying. So what I mean is that the biggest issue in renewables, we actually could provide enough energy from renewables to cover the energy needs of consumers across the United States. The problem is, we can't do it today, but the reason there's an impediment to it is battery technology. Because we have to collect all that energy and then store that energy. What's that?
We don't even have batteries because we're waiting on the price to go down, and it's still that good of an investment.
And
I understand we can't do it all at once,
Sure.
but there's no incentive from the state. And
But
I
you
think
know-
the state should lead.
Exactly, I'm in favor of that, and obviously Donald Trump's not gonna lead at the federal
No,
level on
he's
this,
gonna
so,
go way more.
so I'm in favor of that, I was just more like making the comment that in order for it to be even more effective and for us to spread it, we've gotta invest in battery technology. Guess what? Guess which state has some of the best battery technology development in the entire country? In fact, in the entire world, Illinois, and the Argonne National Laboratory, and several of our state universities. And so to me, this is like, you know, it's like I've got 6 reasons why what you said makes sense.
In terms of down, I'm sorry.
That's okay,
Somebody
I'll
else.
come back.
Okay. In terms of downstate versus upstate, getting into energy and that sort of thing, personally, I don't believe coal jobs are coming back. I'm not sure steel jobs are coming back. We have large pockets. You look at East St. Louis, you look at Cairo, places where there are people, there are no jobs, there's not great education, and if we don't do something for those communities in the downstate, we're
Yes.
stuck. And that's one of the places where I think renewable energy, we have land down here and not as many people, but there's always a stepchild feeling of Southern Illinois to Chicago. And what are your thoughts on how you move this part of the economy?
I have several answers. I am well aware that, first of all, Bruce Rauner has tried to pit part of the state against the other part of the state, right? That is his goal, in fact. He would like everybody outside of Chicago to be at war with everybody in Chicago because that helps him win an election. And I live in Chicago, but I also know that we are all one state, and that we are actually, there's a breadbasket in this state, and there's terrific farmland all across the state. We've got some great industry across the state, and we've got our state universities that are across the state. So when I think about the central and southern Illinois regions of the state, and I look at the problems, I think we need a revitalization plan for the entire state, and particularly central and southern Illinois. And the other day I made the statement publicly, and it got, it was a headline in the Peoria Journal anyway, but I've been saying it for some time, nobody's ever covered it, that I'm coming out with a central and southern Illinois revitalization plan that's focused on the economics of central and southern Illinois, particularly trying to not only make sure that we're stepping up for the government institutions, which often are the job providers in many communities across the state, but also for creating new businesses and for bringing businesses in those areas. And you labeled one really important area that we've got to focus on, which is coal country, essentially, where there's a real opportunity. You have a state representative who cares deeply about this, by the way, and has educated me about it, about creating jobs and using different kinds of energy to help replace some of the jobs that have been lost in the state. But that is job creation. We just can't, there are 3 ways you balance a budget, just so you know why it's really important, aside from just people making promises as, candidates making promises to you. It's really important that we create jobs, because you balance a budget by creating new jobs. That's part of it. There's revenue, expenses, and then there's growth. And growth is the best way to help balance a budget, because you add to the revenue coffers without having to raise anybody's taxes. And so that means helping people start businesses, attracting new businesses into the state. And to me, Central and Southern Illinois, there's so many great resources, educated, dedicated people living all across the state that have been left behind. And I know politicians, I've heard over and over again, I don't consider myself a politician, but I guess here I stand. You guys want to call me that, maybe. But I have heard, that over the years, many politicians have shown up here and said, or all across Illinois, and from Chicago, and they've promised lots of things, and then they don't deliver. And I think Bruce Rauner is one of them, by the way. And so all I can say is that that's not my style. That's not what I do. And my plan, which I'll come out with, over the next few months, I think will address the broader problem. But you raised the issue of renewables, which I think is part of the answer, especially in energy country, so to speak, in Illinois. This gentleman right here,
Yeah, I'm speaking of kind of related to both of the recent questions. I was one of many Illinoisans across the state to work hard for the passage of the Future Energy Jobs Act that applies to a lot of the things you're talking about in terms of a lot of that. I did that because of my concern about jobs, but also because of my concern about the whole climate change issue and the threat that poses to all life on this planet, for that matter.
Yes.
And I also was part of the push to help defend that when Governor Rauner and the Republicans were trying to sweep a lot of the funds, especially like from the Solar for All program that was part of that Jobs Act, into the general budget and so on. How do you stand? Were you involved much in moving for the passage of that bill? And can you just elaborate a little bit more on what, in your role as a governor, you would do in acting about climate change and the threat that it poses?
So maybe there's probably a longer list, but I'll just name two. One is that I think as a state that we should stand up for the Paris Climate Treaty. And so, even if Donald Trump doesn't want to, it's the right thing to do for us. Because it'll create jobs, by the way. It'll create jobs, just what you're describing. And then the second point I'd make is that I have been a supporter of something called the Clean Energy Trust in Chicago, which is an organization that's trying to pull out all the innovation that exists in Illinois to help Illinois be a leader in the development of clean energy. And so again, that's about job creation on the one hand, and about moving away from from dirty fuels to renewable fuels. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know, this is your thoughts about another very real divide between Chicago and downstate, and that is the accessibility of state-supported social services to families that are struggling. So when I say families that are struggling, I'm talking about families that have been involved in the criminal justice system, touched by the opioid crisis, have mental health issues, etc. The accessibility of, say, substance abuse treatment, psychiatrists, group counseling, therapy, juvenile rehabilitation, I could go on and on, is far less accessible down here, and especially as you go even further south and further.
And it became a lot less accessible over the last 2 years, didn't it?
It did, and it was already not. There was already a divide between Chicago and downstate, and the budget thing did not help.
No. And so as the opioid crisis, has continued on an upward slant, the treatment has continued on a downward slant.
That's
Totally
correct.
Understand and agree. And without spending a ton of time on it, I'll just maybe share with you why it matters to me, and that I do care about it, and have spent, by the way, every day this week going to a social service agency that's part of the safety net in Illinois, and highlighting the damage that's been done across the state that we've got to rebuild. Because honestly, many agencies aren't even open anymore. Many offices, psychiatrists have left, treatment centers are gone. And we've got enormous challenges that we've got to go rebuild that safety net across the state. But let me tell you why it matters to me, and and maybe we'll tell you something about my impetus for it, which is, I told you earlier that my father passed away when I was 7 and my mother when I was 17. My mother was an alcoholic. And alcoholism, as all of you know, is a disease. It is an addiction. And it is not something that you just snap your fingers and, oh, I'm gonna be, more disciplined now and not drink. Just like many drugs that are addictive. And honestly, it was extraordinarily destructive for our family. We were lucky that we had people around us, our families, our parents' friends, who became the community that kind of supported us, and our family too. But that is ultimately what killed my mother. And so the opioid epidemic and the treatment for that, this isn't something, there are a lot of people who think that people who suffer from addiction are, like I said, undisciplined, or people who are poor and therefore shouldn't, we don't need to stand up for them. I think they're Republicans, people who believe that. But not me. I mean, I think that not only do we need to stand up and help people, but we need to make it easier to get help. And that's why the closing of so many of these treatment centers and the loss of so many of the people who are part of that treatment, who are the professionals, is so damaging. The families, by the way, it's not just the person who's got the addiction, it's the families that are devastated by that, that person's problem. So I know that doesn't answer exactly how we're gonna do it, but I wanted you to know the impetus is pretty strong in me to deal with it. Yes, ma'am.
What's your stance on net neutrality?
Well, listen, I'm in the tech business, just so you know. So you and I mean, it sounds like you agree with me that, I think that, big companies shouldn't control the internet. So that's the fundamental answer to your question. Yeah, and I've been, I've helped to start a whole bunch of tech businesses that I'm really proud of, and many of them would be hampered significantly if we didn't have net neutrality. So, yes, ma'am. Well, this is the most important person I got to answer a question from.
Yeah. You talk a lot about our colleges and how they suffered during this lack of a budget.
Yeah.
And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the important role that community colleges in particular play to providing job training and, really driving the economic engine of a region.
Yes.
I was an employee at our local community college, Swick, for 30 years, retired from there. I'm still getting my pension check, luckily. They recently laid off 46 people.
Mm-hmm.
And with those 46 people, a lot of institutional knowledge walked out the door.
Right.
And students aren't gonna get the service they deserve when they go into that campus. And that's not the fault of the administration, it's not the fault of anybody, but our lack of a budget. So how are we gonna rebuild them? And how can we ensure that in high schools and community colleges, the skills to train our kids to work for the jobs that are available now are there? I served on the leadership council here locally, and we had businesses tell us all the time, they've got jobs open.
Yeah.
They just can't
Skills.
find workers with the right skills. So I need to understand if you have a plan for using our education system both at the high school and the community college level, and starting to train our children for the jobs that are out there.
Yes, as a matter of fact, so tens of thousands of jobs exist in the state of Illinois where people aren't there with the skills to fill them. So that's just a fact today. We also have a society, so we're going to talk about how we're going to solve that problem, which involves community colleges. But I just want to say that's one fact. Another fact is that for my parents' generation, let's say, you could graduate from college and you could get a job, and then you didn't have to go back to school. You could just have that job, and that was your life. Today, because of the fast pace of technological development, and jobs are changing, companies are changing, skills needed are changing, and that means that those government that provides education has to change, because education has to change. What I mean is that we've got to have lifelong learning. We've got to make sure that skills development isn't something you just do once. It's actually something you'll return to over the course of a lifetime, because upgrading your skills means making sure that you're getting paid well. And so community colleges and vocational training in high schools, which has gone away in most high schools, we've got to bring back. We've got to make sure that people are getting trained for a job if they choose not to go to college, which many people choose not to. We've also got to make sure that people who graduated from high school or who didn't graduate from high school can get trained skills, real skills. So it isn't just you end up in a minimum wage job, but somebody with skills is going to have a much higher paying job. So I think that community colleges play the vital role in providing that kind of set of skills for people who, along the way, in that lifelong learning cycle that I'm talking about, that we can help develop the original skills that people need to get their first job, as well as to keep people fresh for the kinds of jobs that as they develop, so that people aren't losing their jobs for failure of an upgrade of skills. So that's how I would treat community colleges. They're jewels, and they're also, community is the right word. I mean, they're in the community. The universities are in specific locations, but in these citadels around the state. But then community colleges are everywhere, and that's why they are so critically important. Yes, sir.
You talked about, we don't know you, but your employees know you. Can you tell us, do they have health insurance? Are they all getting, are they minimum wage? And those unions you talked about, are they supporting your candidacy?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you asked. Yes, they get benefits. Yes, they are paid higher than minimum wage. They're paid, they're paid reasonably well. No one's getting paid minimum wage that works for me. I'm not aware of anybody. Maybe there's somebody that's, but vast majority. More important than that, I think, is, and this I think is telling of something about me, and that is that there's no other candidate in this race that has any endorsements from labor unions, and I have 17 labor union endorsements and the endorsement of the statewide AFL-CIO. And that's because I've been standing up for working families for my whole adult life. I came to that naturally, as I mentioned to you. As a kid, I think if you're a Democrat, and you've been doing the kinds of things that I've been doing both in the state and nationally to advocate for Democrats, you are working with labor unions, thank goodness, because labor unions are the backbone of the Democratic Party, the backbone of the middle class in the country, and it is, even if you don't belong to a labor union, even if you do not belong to a labor unions are helping keep wages up. And so we ought to be advocates, all of us, even if we're not a member of a labor union, for labor unions, and I will be.
I think we got time for about one more question.
Yes, sir.
So you talk a lot about bringing jobs to the state, and then talk a lot about these jobs like coal and steel and everything that we need to find replacements for and stuff like that. But a lot of times what happens is that we bring jobs in the state, like renewables now, but those aren't in the area where the coal jobs left or the steel jobs left. And then you also spoke just recently about the ability of community colleges to retrain people in that. So what are you gonna do to help the people that had these jobs, that this is what they've done their whole life, that are union workers, that are laborers, that are blue collar, to get them retrained and then find jobs in areas where really there isn't a lot of work coming in, even if you do bring new jobs into the state?
Right. So if we can't bolster the industries that are providing the jobs that they're trained for, which is what you're saying, if we can't do that, then the answer in part is the creation of new small businesses, because that does create, you can do that anywhere. And if we have, and I advocate for, and I'm going to do this as governor, if we have high-speed broadband internet all across the state, then that will help us in the process, by the way, of creating new small businesses. Those businesses, like I said, create many of the jobs that we need to have in this state, and those are it's the critical job creator, in fact, being, as I said, 2/3 of the jobs. That's an important way to combat, as you say, the loss of jobs in some industries. But as this fine lady here said, in fact, in those energy producing areas now, there are replacements of renewable energy jobs that you could bring. And that's not a small thing. I mean, I actually think those energy workers can be those who can't maintain the job that they've got now, because if an industry is dying off or is diminishing, then we can create the very kinds of jobs, again with training, that I think would be easier for them to transition to. But again, critical for our community colleges to be oriented that way, to make sure that they've got the right kinds of training in the right locations. And that's what I think the state ought to be the enhanced provider of funding for. But you can't do it, by the way, if you do what Bruce Rauner's been doing, right? Where universities and colleges have been basically cut by 60%. And so everybody's eating into all their reserves. 5 universities have become junk status universities. And we all know that we can't go on like this. We've got 1.5 years left, I hope, of Bruce Rauner. I hope that's it. And we're gonna have to somehow survive that 1.5 years. As a state, but I think having a vision for changing the way we think in this state, making sure that we've got budgets that pay for the priorities that we're all talking about here today, that's critically important. Is that the last question? I want to make sure. Okay, and can I just say one more thing? We are building a campaign to beat Bruce Rauner. Yes, it's a primary, and we're going to have a primary in March of 2018, but I got into this race because I looked hard at the question of whether we even, as Democrats, we could beat Bruce Rauner. I know you said, well, gee, of course we can, but remember, over years, our infrastructure as a party has been diminishing. We're not doing as much phone banking, and we're not doing as much door knocking, and the things that really get voters out, and that's what we Democrats have been doing forever. That's how we beat them, right? They usually spend all the money on television, and we're the ones who go and knock on doors and get people out to vote. But our infrastructure has been diminished over the years. Second part of the infrastructure that's been diminished is the communications infrastructure. Bruce Rauner and his clan, on the Republican side, they've built up all of their communications infrastructure. They're great at it. And there's no response often that comes from Democrats against the kinds of things that he puts forward. And he tries to fool people. And when no one responds, it's taken for granted. So I looked at the race and said, we could do both of those things. I've been knocking on doors since I was 11 years old. I really believe in the infrastructure of getting people out to vote, of field operation and GOTV. And I know how to do it, and we've got to rebuild it all across the state. And we've got to bolster it wherever it is in place, because it's been diminished, right? Nobody's supporting it. So building that, and then the communications infrastructure, and I'm trying very hard to build all of that within my campaign. And you'll see if you go to our website or on our Twitter feed or Facebook or whatever, that we're trying to combat that. Because remember, on their side, they're using all this stuff that Trump used to, federally, to suppress votes on the Democratic side. So I had to figure out, can we fight that? On the Democratic side, do we even know how to deal with that? To fight their ability to suppress our vote. And I've spent a lot of time, before I became a candidate, figuring out just how we're going to do that, and that's what I'm trying to bring into my campaign. So infrastructure of getting votes out, communications, put them together, I think we can win. I need your help. I need your help now, because we've got to build that infrastructure now to beat him in November of 2018. And I ask you to sign up, to go to our website, to give us your name now, give us your card or whatever, so that we can get in touch with you, because we're starting to do that work now, putting signs up, knocking on doors, even now during the summer. And you say, well, gosh, it's 1.5 years till the election, but we've got to do that, because we've got to get our muscles going, because we've got a big fight ahead. This isn't going to be easy. He put $50 million into his own campaign account, and he took $20 million from the richest man in Illinois, who is also a member of the Koch brothers network, and he took tens of millions of dollars last election cycle from the rest of the Koch brothers network, and he's going to bring that in to fight this battle. My God, you know, he's going to spend an ungodly amount of money and bring every resource, including that Cambridge Analytica that Jared Kushner created at the federal level for, you know, with the Mercer family or whatever, if you've read any of that stuff, you know, for Donald Trump. And we've got to fight all that, and the only way for us to do that is start building it now. We can't start in March of 2018. So please join me in that. Thanks, everybody.
We have some buttons and stuff here if you'd like to grab some on your way out, and